A childhood photograph in a golden frame, a grand house, a forgotten memory. Lorraine had walked past thousands of pictures in 1,000 homes, but this one stopped her cold. Her own young face staring back at her from the mantel of a millionaire's library. That day, a door cracked open. Behind it, a chain of truths long buried, a past reshaped by a single moment of kindness, and a future she never dared imagine. What began as just another catering shift would become a reckoning, and perhaps a return. It was still dark when Lorraine stepped off the bus. The sky above Memphis was heavy, stained the color of soot, and the chill of early spring slipped beneath her worn coat. Her sneakers crunched over loose gravel as she walked past iron gates and trimmed hedges toward the mansion on Ridgeway. Another house, another shift. She adjusted her apron and pressed the heel of her hand to her chest, as if she could push her heart back into rhythm. Inside, the warmth and light made everything seem distant, like a dream viewed through gauze. People moved with efficient silence. Servers in black and white, the scent of polished wood and citrus wax in the air. She took her tray from the kitchen and moved into the drawing room, balancing champagne flutes with the steadiness that came from years of not being seen. "Careful there, sweetheart," a man muttered as she passed, not looking at her. Another guest reached out and took a flute without a glance, fingers grazing her wrist like she was part of the furniture. Lorraine kept moving. The chandeliers caught on the silver in her hairnet. Her feet ached from yesterday and the day before. Every movement was automatic. Hold the tray level, eyes down, smile faint, vanish at will. That was the job. Near the patio doors, 2 servers whispered as they refilled canapes. "Why's she always so stiff?" one said, jerking his chin toward Lorraine. "Who, her?" the other snorted. "Because she thinks this is more than it is." Lorraine didn't flinch. She was used to being a shadow, but something inside her pulled taut. She turned away and walked to the edge of the room, where an old credenza held framed family photos and dusty books. It was the kind of corner where guests didn't linger. She let her eyes drift. There was a sepia portrait of a man on a boat, a wedding photo in grayscale, a woman in pearls, and then something small. A snapshot. A girl in a faded jumper, no older than 7, sitting on school steps with a spiral notebook in her lap. Wide eyes, tight braids. She blinked, then stepped closer. The child in the photo, that was her. Lorraine. Not a look-alike. Not maybe. Her. Down to the chipped front tooth she'd had until the 4th grade. She felt her knees soften. The tray tipped slightly in her hand. "Miss, are you all right?" It was one of the housemaids, a woman in her 60s with stiff curls and a kind mouth. She had come in from the hallway with towels. Lorraine cleared her throat. "On that picture," she said, her voice low. "Where did Mr. Holtz get that?" The maid paused, glanced at it, then smiled faintly. "That's always been there, far as I know. Mr. Holtz says it reminds him who he was." She tilted her head. "You know the girl?" Lorraine opened her mouth, closed it again. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. At home that night, in a narrow apartment above a corner laundromat, she turned on a single lamp and kicked off her shoes. Her mother's cough echoed from the next room, low, persistent, like a ticking clock. The air smelled of vapor-rub and burnt toast. She sat at the table and pulled out a shoebox. Inside, her old teacher's badge rested on top. Ms. Lorraine Carter, grade 2. She ran her thumb across the cracked laminate. There was a time when she believed she'd make a difference, a time when she smiled more, taught lessons with stories, helped kids write poems. A soft knock on her doorframe. You eat? Her mother asked, voice raspy. Yeah, Lorraine lied. You need anything? The old woman shook her head and shuffled back. Lorraine leaned back in her chair, the badge in her palm. The photo haunted her. She hadn't thought about those days in years. The after-school program. The strange man in a suit who visited once a week. Watching her scribble poems with the careful awe of someone looking at fireflies. He'd smiled, asked questions no one else had. She had no name for him back then. Just the sponsor. The next day, she volunteered for another shift at the Holtz estate. She said nothing to the others. When she arrived, Mr. Holtz himself was there, taller than she remembered from news photos. Late 60s. White hair brushed back, the kind of stillness in his posture that came from being listened to all your life. He noticed her during hors d'oeuvres. Something in his eyes changed. You, he said quietly. You went to Roosevelt Elementary, didn't you? Lorraine froze. Yes, sir. A long time ago. What year did you start there? 92. Left in 98. Holtz nodded slowly, as if confirming something long suspected. After the guests left, he asked her to stay a moment. She waited in the front parlor, heart tight in her chest. When he returned, he was holding an old photo album. The leather cover was worn, the pages stiff. He laid it open on the table. There she was again. The same photo, clipped from a school newsletter. Her name beneath it, Lorraine Carter, age 8. Future writer, the caption read. I remember you, Holtz said. You were always writing, even when no one asked you to. Lorraine said nothing. Her throat burned. I funded that program for 5 years, he went on. Didn't think it did much good, honestly. But then you sent me a letter. I still have it somewhere. You wrote a poem about rain falling on cracked sidewalks. Said you wanted to fix the broken places. He paused, then looked up. I kept your picture because you reminded me of something I was starting to forget. That maybe money wasn't the only way to build something. Lorraine stared at her hands. I never became a writer. That's not what I saw when I looked at you, he said. I dropped out of college. My mom got sick. I started working. First a store, then a school, then... She gestured vaguely. This. Holtz was quiet for a long moment. The room seemed to breathe. You're still the same, he said. Not what you do. How you see. Lorraine felt something shift, like the floor had tilted slightly beneath her feet. Then he said it. Not an offer, exactly. A possibility. I'm starting a new program for middle schoolers. Could use someone like you to run a creative hour. Just an hour a week. Volunteer if that's what makes it easier. She didn't answer right away. Her body wanted to say no. She could hear the voices already. The doubt, the laughter, the reminders of where she belonged. But her mind whispered something else. A small voice, barely audible. What if? That night, she sat on the bus home and pulled a notebook from her bag. The pages were mostly blank. She hadn't written in months, maybe years. She stared at the lines. Then, slowly, her hand began to move. The dining room had been cleared of its crystal and linens, the fireplace dark, but the house still carried the residue of laughter and wine. Lorraine stood by the sideboard, unsure if she should be waiting or leaving. Her fingers tugged at the seam of her glove. The housekeeper gave her a look, half sympathy, half curiosity, before vanishing down the corridor. Mr. Holtz returned with 2 mugs. Not china, not for show. Stoneware, chipped on the rim. One was handed to her without ceremony. Lorraine took it. The tea inside smelled like chamomile and faint citrus. Her hands wrapped around the warmth without thinking. "Let's sit," he said simply. They did, not across from each other like a meeting, but at the same side of a long, empty table. A fire hadn't been lit in the hearth, but the silence between them filled the room with something quieter than heat. She glanced at the mug again. "You wanted to talk?" "I did." He looked ahead, not at her. "I've been thinking about something for a while. A new education program. Local, small scale, middle school kids, public school only, the kind that get forgotten." Lorraine tilted her head. "That's a lot of them." "Yes." A pause. "That's why I need someone who knows what forgotten feels like." She didn't answer. Not yet. He pulled a folder from the seat beside him, opened it. Inside were outlines, handwritten notes, cutouts from education journals. He flipped through them, then slid a photo out from the back. The same one she'd seen before. Herself, age 8. "I told my wife once," he said, voice low. "If this girl ever writes a book, I want to read the first copy." Lorraine stared at the picture. Her cheeks flushed, even though she knew it was ridiculous. That girl was a ghost, a memory with crooked teeth. "Why me?" she asked. Holtz shrugged. "Because I remember what your eyes looked like. You had no reason to believe in anything, but you did anyway." She exhaled slowly. "That didn't get me very far." "Didn't it?" His voice wasn't sharp, just quiet. "You could have stayed bitter. You didn't. You could have disappeared. But here you are." Lorraine shook her head. "I serve drinks at parties. You still show up. You still look people in the eye." He looked at her now. "That's more than most." The words sat between them like a note struck on a piano and left to echo. Lorraine sipped the tea. Her throat had tightened without her realizing it. He didn't offer her money. Not even a job exactly. Just a place to stand and speak. 1 hour a week. A quiet invitation. She told him she'd think about it. When she returned to the staff room to collect her coat, 2 of the junior waiters were still folding linens. They didn't stop talking when she walked in. "Did you see her in there? Like they're best friends now." "Girls got dreams." Laughter. Lorraine grabbed her things and walked out. That week, she started writing again. Not full poems, not yet, but pieces, images. The way the light hit her mother's cheekbones in sleep. The way silence in a classroom feels different when it's full of listening. On Saturday morning, she stood outside the recreation center in South Memphis, holding a bag of old notebooks and a rolled-up poster. She wore jeans and her best sweater. The nerves sat in her throat like marbles. Inside, the room was loud. 11 kids, ages 10 to 13. Loud sneakers on tile, gum wrappers in the corner, suspicion in their eyes. A boy in the back muttered, "What's she gonna teach us? How to carry a tray?" A girl next to him snorted. Lorraine didn't answer. She walked to the whiteboard and uncapped a marker. She wrote, "Where you're from is not who you are." Then turned. "Y'all don't have to believe that, but you're gonna hear it today at least." A boy near the window raised a brow. "You a teacher?" She hesitated. "I used to be." The room buzzed. A girl chewed her braid. One of them, maybe 2, were already reaching for their phones. Lorraine pulled out an old composition book, faded blue cover. She flipped to a page and began to read. Her own poem from age 9. She didn't announce it. She just read. Rain walks across sidewalks like it's looking for broken things. Cracks it can slip into. Places no one fills. For a moment, only the sound of the HVAC hummed above them. A different boy near the front, smaller than the rest, said, "You wrote that?" "Yeah." His face was unreadable. Then he nodded, slow and small, and murmured, "Okay then." The hour passed faster than she expected. They wrote lines about where they'd been that week. They talked about words that felt like home, and ones that felt like walls. She left the center with ink on her hands and something brighter in her chest than she'd felt in years. Holtz was waiting in his car outside. He didn't get out, just lowered the window. "Well?" "I didn't lose anyone," she said. "Good. I'm not sure I helped either." "You showed up," he said. "That's where the work begins." The second week, they asked if she had more poems. She brought 2. The third week, she gave them blank journals. They started arriving early. The fourth week, one of the girls stayed behind after class. Didn't say much, just handed her a folded paper with a shaky poem on it. "I want to be the quiet that people wait for." Lorraine didn't speak for a full 10 seconds after reading it. One night after a session, she returned to the catering job. The shift supervisor looked her over as she clocked in. "Huh, you look different." Lorraine blinked. "What do you mean?" "I don't know, taller or something." She smiled just a little. "Must be the shoes." The other servers didn't say much anymore, not because they approved, but because they didn't know where to place her now. She no longer fit. In the staff lounge one afternoon, Lorraine sat eating her sandwich while 2 servers scrolled through their phones. "Where Holtz is putting together some scholarship fund," one said. "Something about inner-city kids. Probably a PR thing." They looked up. Lorraine was watching them. "He's calling it the Carter Fund," she said evenly. They blinked. "Wait, your name?" "Yeah." Silence. Then one of them nodded awkwardly. "That's cool." She nodded back, took another bite. None of it had been loud. Not the photo, not the offer, not the classroom. It had all started quietly. A look, a memory, a possibility. But the thing about quiet is, when it finally speaks, people listen. By the end of that month, she didn't need the tray anymore. Not because she'd quit, not yet, but because her hands were full of notebooks instead. And every week, as she stood in front of a classroom with mismatched chairs and kids who pretended not to care, she saw something. The way they leaned forward without knowing it. The way their pens hovered just a little longer above the page. The way silence could mean attention, not absence. And she thought, maybe broken places don't always need to be filled. Maybe they just need to be seen. Saturday morning came with the scent of rain. The kind that hadn't fallen yet, but lived in the air like a held breath. Lorraine unlocked the side door of the rec center with the key they'd finally trusted her with. She flicked on the lights and walked into the room. Her bag heavy with folders and bent notebooks, one of which had her name carefully handwritten in a child's script. The classroom had changed, not much. Still linoleum floors and folding chairs. Still that hum from the overhead fluorescents. But the kids came early now. They asked if they could stay late. They argued over metaphors, and once, after she read a piece about her mother's hands, one of the toughest boys muttered, "That was real," and stared hard at the floor. Lorraine had learned not to smile too big when they said things like that. just nodded and kept going. Now they called her Miss Lorraine. She still worked catering during the week, still took the 6:10 a.m. bus, still picked up discounted vegetables from the corner market. But there was something different in her step. She no longer moved like she was apologizing for taking up space. One afternoon, a boy named Jaden stayed behind, fidgeting with his backpack. "You okay?" she asked. He shrugged. "We had to write something for homeroom. I wrote about you. Hope that's not like... weird." Lorraine's chest tightened. "Can I see it?" He hesitated, then handed over a single sheet of lined paper. Written in blocky, determined handwriting. "I want to be like Miss Lorraine. Not because she's famous, but because when she talks, you remember stuff you forgot you knew. Like maybe you matter." She didn't speak for a long time. "Thank you," she said finally, voice low. "Soxen, that's the best thing anyone's ever written about me." He flushed and made for the door without another word. That evening, Holtz called. She almost didn't answer. She was folding laundry, her mother humming in the other room. But she picked up on the fourth ring. "I wanted you to know," he said. "The board approved the scholarship. First one will be awarded this fall." Lorraine stood still, one sock in her hand. "They're naming it after you," Holtz added. "Hope that's all right." She didn't know what to say. Not at first. Then, "That's more than all right." She could hear him smile over the line. At a corporate event a week later, Holtz asked her to speak. Nothing grand, just a few words before lunch. Lorraine had never stood at a podium in heels. Her knees ached, her palms sweated. But when she stepped up to the mic and looked out at the crowd, suits, pearls, folded arms, she didn't flinch. "You don't have to be important to do something important," she said. Then paused. "I was a waitress. I'm still a waitress, but I'm also someone's reason to try, and that's enough." No one clapped right away, but then someone did, then another. Not loud, but honest. The next day, a photo of her appeared in the local paper, a shot from the speech. Her eyes steady, mouth mid-sentence. The headline read, "A Voice from the Quiet." It made her mother cry. Later that week, Holtz asked to meet, not in his mansion this time, but in the center itself, during one of the quiet hours before kids arrived. He walked the halls slowly, looking at the drawings taped to the walls. One was of Lorraine, a cartoon version, holding a notebook like a shield. "I wanted you to see this," he said, handing her a printed draft. It was a mission statement. For a new initiative, the title, Invisible No More. A Foundation for Women in Crisis. Lorraine read the first paragraph twice. "You're building this?" "With your help," he said. "We already secured the first space, transitional housing. After that, training, education, whatever they need." She touched the page like it might vanish. "You said something once," he added, "that the system didn't fail you once. It failed you slowly, every time you asked for less because you expected less." Lorraine nodded. "That's still true." He smiled gently. "Then let's unfail some people." The news spread quietly at first. A small article, a flyer, a few volunteers. But then people started showing up. Former students, mothers, young women with resumes and no references. One of them recognized Lorraine from a shift at a restaurant. Said, "I thought you were just a server." Lorraine just smiled and said, "I still am." Her old co-workers from catering came by one day. They stood in the back of the classroom like awkward tourists, watching as the kids read their poems aloud. One of the servers, the one who'd once called her stiff, stayed behind afterward. "You always had this in you?" he asked, rubbing the back of his neck. She shrugged. "I guess so." He looked around. Didn't see it. Lorraine looked at the kids packing their bags, laughing. Most people don't, until they have to. That night, she got home to find her mother watching the news. The TV was turned low, the captions rolling across the screen. "There you are," her mother said, smiling. "And you're wearing my old brooch." "I always do." She sat beside her on the couch. They didn't say much. The news went on. A feature segment aired about the scholarship, the foundation, the writing program. A reporter asked her, "Do you feel like a success story?" Lorraine had said, "No. I feel like someone who was seen at the right time, and who finally learned to see herself the same way." The next week, she brought her old Waitress badge to the center, pinned it above the whiteboard where she taught. Some of the kids asked what it was. "That's from my last job," she said. They looked confused. "Aren't you a teacher?" She paused. "I think I've always been one, even when I wasn't paid for it." They nodded, like that made perfect sense. The badge stayed there. One evening, as she was locking up, a little girl lingered at the door. Maybe 8. Small frame, oversized backpack. "Miss Lorraine?" "Yeah, sweetheart." The girl looked down, then up. "You think I can do something big?" Lorraine crouched to meet her eyes. "I think the world already started turning because of something you did today." The girl blinked. "Like what?" "You showed up." She smiled, small, uncertain, and ran off. Lorraine stood there for a long time, listening to the echo of footsteps, the creak of the floor, the breath of a quiet building that had once been empty, and now pulsed with life. The city still looked the same outside. The bus routes, the corner stores, the cracked sidewalks. But Lorraine had changed. Not loud, not overnight, but fully and forever.